Hello everyone, Burb here. Taiki Speed SSR is being released later today, and while I don't go over every single card, this card is particularly fascinating to me because it occupies a part of the meta that we really haven't seen yet in this game, but will most likely be how cards are going to arrive in the future. So far, normally the meta has been pretty cut and dry. There's cards like Kidus in Black, where every single part of the card is screaming pull, 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 and our hindsight with JP has told us that this was pretty much a must pull for people who were playing at the time because the skill was good, the stat output was incredible, and its longevity was over multiple years. There was other parts and other cards that were like their influence on their specific scenarios and the times where they were relevant were so high that they are also great pulls, but not must pulls, like Riko Kashimoto in Unity and Narita Top Road in Trackblazer. We've also seen cards in the meta like Yainu Mateki who are great cards, just at unfortunate timings, where this card is incredible. It's just it was so close to Kidus in Black that no one could pull for it. And we've seen cards that have good uses but aren't meta because their uses are so niche, like Shisami Shinzawa. And I'm here to say that Taiki Shuttle is none of these, but has parts of each of these. It is a card that has an incredibly potent point in the meta, but is so niche and at such a bad timing that it's difficult to pull for. But is it only for whales? That is the question that I am going to be answering today by looking at the card. The first thing that should really go and put up a red flag is it's an MLB only card, in my personal opinion. Now, some people have said 3LB. I personally disagree for two reasons. First of all, 1LB is cope, but not great at all. Unfortunately, Taiki's bonus thing for the 1LB people is that 10% training effectiveness is what she gains. Now, 10% training effectiveness is a lot of stats. It's one of the most important effects in the game, and also it just increases all the good stats. Your specialty priority gets increased, your friendship bonus gets increased, and that's going to be really important next scenario. Your initial friendship gauge goes up an additional 4, which makes it mean that there's one less training. Every single part of this is not really working at 1LB very well. And even at 3LB, the hint level goes from 3 to 4, which doesn't seem like a lot, except just like Yainu Mateki, you basically need half the amount of hints in order to get the same number of chances at getting relevant skills, because every single time with hint level 4 means you get a level 5 hint, and that hint is crossed out. So if there's 6 hints you want, let's say you go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, rather than having to tap twice and possibly repeating a hint. So that chance is a lot better, even going from 3LB to 4 MLB. This, in essence, because of its hint effect, makes it closer to a utility card. It is one of those cards that has very good skills attached to it that also happens to have good training. While we'll talk about the training, it's important to note that these skills are ridiculously good. Wet conditions is obviously good on wet tracks, but if you're looking at a front runner or pace chaser style, you look at these skills and they're like pretty much everything that you want. You have shifting gears, productive plan is the white version of Mile Maven, which we'll talk about, Mile Straights, and Speed Eater. Speed Eater is very difficult to grab. It's not on very many cards. It's on a handful of cards that are also SSRs. And while you get Straight Course, which is kind of funny because it only works on 2 to 3 tracks, you do get P2P for the pace chasers, corners, which means you now have corners and straights and Speed Eater, and most importantly, Mile Maven, which is a gold early race skill for miles. Now, it's a front half of the pack, and it is particularly potent on front runners. Now, it can be played on pace chasers, and it basically has standard utility effect. But for front runners, especially on mile tracks, have very few spots where they are able to overtake each other. This is why stuff like Operation Cacao and KFC are both very good early race skills-ish. You know, KFC's a little later, but it's just that powerful. But skills that proc very early on in the straight help you go and take that first position before this final corner. This final corner is very difficult to pass people on. And so the situations where you're able to pass people in the front runner position are basically the first straight up until what's known as the no zone, which is the place where your Uma starts to go and shift towards to its initial lane for the corner, up till the corner, and then on that first part of the corner. Not a front runner main, but that is my understanding of it. And Mile Maven procs in the early race, which means it procs before this zone, which means it usually has good effect. Now the problem is that Mile Maven has accumulate time 5, and currently how this game works is that it calculates that phase random 0, it's a random point in the early race before the race starts, and then it checks it during that point in the race. So hypothetically, if it chooses time equals 0, it will figure out and go through its activation conditions and figure out that 5 seconds has not passed, and it will not proc. So it has a dead zone, albeit it was a glitch that is later fixed in second anniversary. I believe it's second anniversary. It might be a bit later. But this means that there is a 30% to 35% of a dead zone. However, this skill is just that good because it is a gold skill that procs at a timing where you are able to overtake people, and stuff like this combined with its on means you pretty much are guaranteeing that you are in the early race. You are the early race victor until something like a cacao takes it back from you. So the skill is incredibly potent, especially for front runners. But how is the training? This is the part that makes this card very, very tough to evaluate because her training is also very good. It's almost wholly carried by the fact that she has 2 speed bonus and a power bonus, just like Mr. CB. In fact, it's so close to Mr. CB. If you take a look at the 2 cards side by side, you have a little bit less training effectiveness, but the mood effectiveness basically converts into training effectiveness. And you find that these are basically kind of like the same card. Now, a lot of it's based on the unique effect, just like CB, we're getting the speed bonus and the skill point bonus. But still, this basically means that its training is just quite good. If you do the math with the base training rates, base is 8 in Track Blazer, so a level 3 would be 10. You add your stat bonus, then you multiply it by your growth rate, which would be on your Uma, so we don't take that into account. 1.2 for the mood. There's no mood effect on this one, so it's just a flat 20% bonus. An additional 10% for training effectiveness, a 25% for the friendship bonus because we're doing a friendship training, and 1.05 for the participation bonus, and we get 19 speed, and we do the same for power to get 8 power. Now this training is quite good when you compare it to other cards that will be in the meta in Grand Live. Now Grand Live has different stuff, I know, but if we just take it just what we know in Track Blazer, basically it's the same as a Kidison Black tap, because they both have power bonus. They both have this roughly the same friendship bonus, stuff like that, but Kidison Black has a little bit more specialty priority in the mid 115s to 120s, I believe it was. I think it was 126 is what someone calculated it out to be. Agnes Tachyon Speed, which will be pretty much the primary speed card because of Scenario Link, is less power, same speed, but it has 2 skill point bonus. So that's sort of the trade-off. Summer Marzensky at MLB is better than it. It's about 19 and 8 at level 3 because it's taking into account full TEF. If you're at a level 3 training, it's only pretty much the same as Taiki Shuttle, but it has less specialty priority. And at 1LB, it is much greater than, obviously, because it is a MLB card. So it's a very comparable stat stick to the best speed cards in the game, which means it's usable even outside of its gold skill as well. So now here comes the part where I start offering suggestions. I try to give you as much info as possible to form your own conclusion. And after this point, what I suggest is to try to use your critical thinking. I'm going to go and propose a bunch of info about this card. You will probably have an inkling on whether or not that this is a good pull or not, and follow that thread of thought. I will give my conclusion of what I believe at the end and compare it to see if it is the same. Okay, this is how I normally like to do these card reviews. So, firstly, remember that the best cards in the game, this is a reuse slide from CAB, to be honest, they are great stat sticks, but also they are great because they have very good generalist skills that are used a lot. Stuff like Measure Romanu has Mile and Mediums, which are 80% of the CMs. Stuff like El Contrapasa and Kidison have Professor of Curvature as their primary skill as well, which is just usable on pretty much everybody. This is a card with a very good stat stick. It's about 90 to 95% of the best speed cards in the game. They usually have a little bit more than her, but it's still perfectly fine. She also has an incredibly good mile skill, especially on front runners, but it can only proc in the front half of the pack. which means you should probably get to the conclusion that, hey, if you care about the skill, remember that it lasts a long time in the meta. Now, Mile Maven, this is still the only Japanese source of Mile Maven. They have not printed this skill on another card. What brings us out of the meta is that, hey, you generally need skill points eventually. And in a year or two, a little bit more than that, you're going to really want the 2 SP cards, and that's when this card starts to fall out of favor. Now, can it still be used? It's perfectly fine because Mile Maven eventually gets buffed to second half of early race, which takes out its dead zone completely, which makes the skill much, much better. Now, again, this is front half of the pack. And the skill is usable only in mile CMs. Otherwise, it is simply just a stat stick. And when it's just a stat stick, not only is it 95% of the current cards that are going to be out within the next month or two, it's also going to be quickly replaced by other great stat sticks like El Condor Pasta Speed, stuff if you're a backliner like Jungle Pocket, your rule card that happens in Grandmasters, stuff like that is going to all supersede this. And mile tracks are within a cool 1 out of 4 to 1 out of every 5 Champions meetings or League of Heroes, because some dirts are also miles as well. But it's a rarer type of CM than the mediums are in general. It's not the rarest, but it's still lesser used. Also, you should really consider picking cards that best represent your favorite style. We're now getting to the point of the game that if you have more than just like 2 great SSR speed cards, you really got to start thinking, which styles do you enjoy playing? Because 1, Grandmasters is going to destroy all of our budgets if we play all 4 styles, but 2, you need to start using the skills on them. Again, Kidison Black is so good because we use Pro Curve. It's also a great stat stick. This is a great stat stick, but are you going to use the gold skill? So immediately, if you're a backline player, are you going to be able to proc Mile Maven when there's no guaranteed PDM break on mile tracks, because Umastan is not a guaranteed PDM break, which means you have to follow the rules of the early game unless you get lucky, of course. But that is unlikely, and we are most likely going into a front meta even more than we see now because of the release of Summer Marazensky Speed in a couple of weeks. So most likely we will have front-focused lobbies on a mile track without a guaranteed PM break, which means we will probably not be in the front of the pack, which means it's very unlikely we use the skill as an end closer or a late surger player. So you should consider probably not pulling this card if you are one of these 2 roles. And that may seem obvious to you, but this is the sort of analysis that you should be thinking about when more cards come up that are not necessarily as cut and dry as Taiki Speed is for us. When there's cards that look like they should be used in our style, but they aren't exactly what we are looking for. Now let's go a little bit more gray area. Pace Chasers in general. This is Mile Maven. Mile Maven is a front half pack. You should be able to proc the skill. But the thing is that we have a lot of priorities coming up. Pace Chasers also have, first of all, everyone needs to pull for Light Hello and Tachyon if you have the carrots for it. If you have any amount of carrots right now and can get to a spark even, if not 2 sparks, you probably should pull on this banner because this is the scenario card that is pretty much required on this. It's required for the next 4 months. It'll give you a lot of good mileage and happiness playing this card in the next 4 months. It just so happens it also comes with a secondary bonus of Agnes Tachyon Speed, which is a very good speed card for the scenario because it has Scenario Link, which really helps you in the perfect scenario. But for Pace Chasers, it's also a very good Pace Chaser card because it gives Unstoppable. It has, just like Taiki Shuttle, its merits when it comes to training. It's slightly weaker in the speed department. However, it has 2 SP bonus, which will really, really help you and increase its longevity because skill point bonus is incredibly effective in future scenarios. The skill itself, Unstoppable, is just a pure mid-race skill. Think something like Fast and Furious for late surgers or Daring Strike for end closers, although it is more closer to a Professor of Curvature in that it is a 2.4 second skill. However, because there's no dead zone, it just procs every time if you're a Pace Chaser at a random point with no positional requirement, and it's 80% as effective as a Mile Maven. And it can be used outside of miles. So you have a card on a banner with a good card that is required pretty much for the scenario, with a great skill on a Pace Chaser that you're going to be using in the future on a card that has very good skill point output with decent speed output, that has a decent amount of longevity for Pace Chasers, which means this banner should be your priority over Taiki Shuttle Speed. in my personal opinion. You may come to a different conclusion, but I think it's reasonable to say that, hey, you really should be even MLBing this card because it just has such good value as a speed card for pace chasers in general. Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is frontrunners. They get the most mileage out of this card because of how hard it is to get first place as a frontrunner in the early race. Again, you have this banner that's required that you should be pulling for. The speed card is great as a stat stick, as well as having scenario link mechanics, so that is 4 months of happiness right there. And you have this banner, Summer Marozensky Speed Banner, which has Top Runner. I'm going to grab a drink of water, sorry. And Summer Marozensky has Top Runner, which is a great skill. It has very, very good speed output. It's technically slightly less than this card, but in Grand Live, we're going to be going and increasing our trainings quite a bit, so it probably will get more overall speed output over the course of the run. Again, Top Runner is basically the same thing as Mile Maven because it's a 3-second skill. That's 0.35, and it can be used on every single track because it is frontrunner bound and not mile bound. And so if you're just a frontrunner player, you will probably get more mileage out of Top Runner. Even if you're a front pace player where you hybrid it, you're going to probably play more frontrunners than you are going to have mile tracks. And so you really should prioritize this banner and this banner up here before picking Taiki Shuttle. And you still get value from MLBing. Even if you only think you need 1 LB, you can see this card does still get better when you MLB it. And eventually you're going to run out of slots as you play this game more. And yes, while she's usable at 1 LB, do you really want to go all your life as a frontrunner main in the prime position of being a frontrunner main, where they're the strongest role in the game, and run a subpar car for that time, and then max this later, after frontrunners start getting further and further out of the meta, and they're only basically League of Heroes stuff in like a year or so, and you've lost the prime of this card in the prime of the role that you enjoy playing most. That is the trade-off that you are asking yourself. Again, in the Grand Live, you're going to have a Speed Wit deck, and it's just that this card can't really be fit into a frontrunner build, or really any build, if you have the top meta cards right now. If you're pulling for every frontrunner top meta cards, you have to go and look at the replacement costs. And you look at the replacement costs of Summer Maru, you aren't replacing this card because Top Runner is better than Mile Maven because it doesn't have any dead zone. Tachyon, you lose the scenario link, so it's hard to replace that card. Kidist and Black, you lose Pro Curve, which is technically worse than Mile Maven due to its timing. Fine Motion, you lose too much wit. Mahono Bourbon, you lose taking the lead and your wit loss. That's pretty much a non-negotiable at this point for frontrunners. And then Light Hello, you lose the scenario mechanic completely and the link, so that's pretty much a no-go as well. So your two options are getting Tachyon, you're losing Tachyon, which is some scenario link, and you're losing Kidison, and you're getting a marginal increase in value because Mile Maven is, let's say, a 40% better skill than Pro Curve on specific mile tracks. And all of a sudden, the gap between pulling for this card and dedicating 60,000 carats towards it is very tough to recommend to people. So for frontrunners, I would suggest getting Marozensky and getting Tech Hello before even considering this card. That is my personal suggestion. So really, is this a whale only card? Also, we have brand new players to take into account. I think this is a good reroll target. We have 3 good reroll targets coming up, which are this Taiki Speed card, Summer Marozensky, as well as Light Hello and Tachyon. For those who don't want to be just frontrunner mains, I know there's some people who just don't like frontrunners, and they know that before they're going into the game. Marozensky Speed is a great target just for the stat stick. Taiki Speed is also such a great target, and the difference between them is you may get enough to scrounge up a half spark, or a little bit more than a half spark, because we are getting free pulls on this, to hopefully get another spark on Light Hello and Tachyon. And while ideally it may be better to go and re-roll onto Light Hello Tachyon, I don't think it's going to really sway the person that's joining the game right now to say, hey, you should really wait for 6 to 8 weeks right now before you start playing a game. There's enough time to go and re-roll this card until you get MLB, which will take a while. We'll do a video on that. And then you may have enough for a spark, maybe with a little bit of financial assistance, to go and pull a spark on this to at least get a culpable set of cards. If you get lucky on it, you get Taiki Shuttle as a speed card, which again is a good stat stick, even if when it's not mile. We're talking new players now. And then we get culpable versions of both too. Let's say it's just like a 1LB, 2LB. It's fine. We get a little lucky, right? And all of a sudden, our deck isn't looking that bad. We have a couple of SSR speed cards. Maybe we have to bump one up with a crystal here or there, and you borrow one of your wit cards, premier wit cards, and you have a semi-competitive deck that probably can slip you into a finals. And if you get a little bit less lucky and can really only get one cope card, well, then you just use like a bunch of SSR wit cards. Your wit cards aren't as great. Wit is still a luxury, right? You may have less good results, but it's still a very usable deck, just borrowing one of the two good cards when you need them. That makes sense. This can act as basically the same thing that we're doing with Citizen Black, and all you're doing is losing Professor of Curvature, which is great. However, for the brand new player that's getting into it right now, this card still has longevity of a year or two before skill point bonus really becomes incredibly important. It's just for the miles only. Remember that. So it's Taiki Speed truly only for whales. Yeah, I mean, technically, high spenders and brand new players is what I would say. It's not necessarily a whale only card. You do have to be a high spender. There is a few banners I think that you should consider before it, but it does have enough use and enough longevity that, hey, if you're like willing to spend a bunch of sparks on this and you plan on having your next two banners, I think you're fine. It's just, hey, it's about 120,000 carats at that point. I don't think anyone really has that amount. So it's sort of operating in this weird middle zone. The quick and easiest way to compare it to, and it's not exactly this, is Super Creek in terms of what it's trying to do. Super Creeks are for the longs. It makes your long tracks quite good. It had a longevity of probably about 2 to 2.5 years, being the top long track card. Now we have a couple of options for it that are not worth pulling because this card is just that good, and it still becomes great later on when cards later, like, I don't know, like Air Shakur, Stamina come out, and it becomes the second best card at this point. Taiki Shuttle has the same thing, but it's for mile tracks, giving a mile skill for frontrunners and pace chasers, but mostly for frontrunners and, you know, a little bit of use for pace chasers as well. It's sort of the same scenario. It's not used very often, but hey, it's an option for those new and those with a ton of carats to their name. So again, personal suggestion is on the screen right now. Whether you decide to pull or not pull, good luck on whatever banner that you're pulling as well. I hope this analysis has been useful to you. And ask me again if you want another card reviewed, because that's kind of why I did this card, is because we were looking at it in the Discord and we saw that, hey, this is kind of interesting because this card is a lot better than people are really giving it credit for. It's just very, very, very niche. So take care, everyone. Burb out.